everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a pretty short one, but I just wanted to do a quick video about creating a sourdough starter from scratch. And this is something I did back in December, and I'm so glad I did it because I use my sourdough starter multiple times a week, and it's just like taking my cooking to the next level, especially when I'm really focused on traditional cooking and cooking everything from scratch. It's just been amazing, and I'm so glad I started one. Now obviously today's video is going to be about creating one yourself, but you can buy one from people who sell it. I know Ballerina Farm sells her starter. You can buy it on their website, and there's some other websites and creators, bloggers out there that sell their starter. It'll come in a dehydrated form, and you usually just rehydrate it, but that's an option. Or you could get some sourdough starter from a friend that already has a starter that is close to you. I have given my mom some of my starter, and she was able to just feed it and start baking with it right away. And yeah, that's also an easy way to get a starter. But if you have a do-it-yourself spirit like I do, then starting from scratch is going to be for you. So I hope that this video helps you when creating your starter. My approach to sourdough starter is so easy. I don't use a scale. I just feed it like based off consistency rather than like super accurate grams. Yeah, it's just really easy, and I feel like a lot of people make it more complicated than it has to be, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It's honestly super easy to maintain and to start. So here is my sourdough starter. I have it in this glass jar. This is like an Anchor Hocking brand, I think, from Walmart. And this is the lid. Yeah, it's Anchor Hocking. I keep it in here because I like to keep a little bit more starter, because some of the recipes I use call for like a cup and a half or a full cup. So, and sometimes if I use that for that recipe, the starter is like gone. So I like to keep a little bit more than like a little bit in a jar. I know some people just keep a tiny like half cup in a jar, but that's just not enough for me. So I keep it in here, and I'm gonna try to do this without spilling it. Maybe I can just... Here's a better look at what it actually looks like. Right now this has fell, so it's not like completely, it's not ready to bake with in this very moment, but you can see it has bubbles all throughout. Hopefully you can see. So it has bubbles all throughout. This is what you kind of want it to look like. It smells like a really weak smelling beer, maybe like a Bud Light. It does kind of smell like, it smells fermented and smells a little bit sour, but that's the whole point. Like, it's gonna smell like that when it's healthy and thriving. If it's actually underfed, it'll smell even more pungent, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, that's what it looks, smells like, and the consistency is like a thick pancake batter, or just like pancake batter. Just kind of depends on how hydrated you like your starter to be. You can feed it less water or more water. It won't affect the yeast in it. You just kind of get a feel for the kind of consistency that you like to cook with. It's funny because I always feed my starter a little bit more water whenever I know I'm making something like pancakes or crepes or something I just know that I want it to be more liquidy for. But I will feed it a little bit less water if I know I'm going to be making breads, because I like it to be a little bit more thick when I'm making breads. That's honestly just a personal preference. It doesn't affect the way the bread rises at all, I don't think. But that's just kind of what I do, just mentally in my head. Okay, now for starting the starter from scratch, you're gonna want a glass jar or a glass container like the one I have mine in now, but I do recommend a glass jar such as this when first starting, so you can see the starter rising or falling inside the jar. It's just easier when it's in like a vertical container. It's not necessary, but this one, it was really nice. This is on my Amazon storefront, also in my blog, if you want to get the same exact one. But I like these jars because it comes with a seal around this, but you can easily take it off, so the lid isn't airtight. And you don't want an airtight lid when you're first starting, because the starter is capturing the yeast colonies in the air and in the flour, and it needs air to breathe. If you have an airtight lid on it, it will explode because of the bacteria cultures that it's trying to create inside. So first, get the container you're putting it in, and then you're gonna want a flour, either in unbleached all-purpose, a whole wheat, or like an einkorn flour. One of those three will be good. I don't recommend starting a starter with rye flour, just because, I mean, I guess you could, but it's an expensive flour, and your starter will like pop off. And I know that's like good, but I don't know, I just feel like an all-purpose unbleached is probably the best option. I actually started mine with a whole wheat, so a whole wheat would be good as well. Once your starter is established, you can really just switch the flour that you use on and off. Like last night, I fed my starter with an einkorn, and that was the first time I did it, and it seemed to really like the einkorn. Every time I feed it with a different flour, it just like bubbles right up, it doubles in size, and it's good to go. Get your flour, just make sure that whatever flour you're using is unbleached. Then you're gonna start with, I would say a half of cup. You can do a half of a cup of flour, half a cup of water, or if you want more starter, you can do a cup of flour and a cup of water. As long as it's a 1-to-1 ratio or close to it, you're fine. Maybe once you're starting it, you can do half a cup of flour and then half a cup of water, just to have a little bit less to work with and a little bit less to throw away. That's another thing to consider when you're first starting your starter. You are gonna have to discard more than half of what is in the container. So if you're worried about waste, then you can start with a smaller amount of flour. Now, the kind of water you're using does matter. You do need a filtered water. You can't use tap water, like a city water, because that does have fluoride, chlorine, a bunch of other bad stuff in it that will negatively impact the yeast colonies you're trying to create. Filtered water is just clean, it's better for you, it's better for the starter, so use a filtered water. We are lucky enough to have a reverse osmosis system in our home, so that is the water that I use. You can use water from the fridge too. If you have like a fridge that has water filter in it, that works as well. So let's just pretend that you're using half a cup of flour and half a cup of water to start your starter. So you're gonna put that into a jar, stir it up really well, and use a wooden spoon or like a silicone spatula. You don't want to use metal. I don't know the science behind it, but metal will interact with the yeast in the flour, and your starter's not gonna do good if you use metal. I made that mistake when starting first, and like my starter did not do good. So don't use just regular silverware, use a wooden spoon. This is the spoon spatula that I use to stir my starter. It is nice and thin, and I got this from Walmart. It's the Pioneer Woman Collection, so definitely recommend this guy. It was like a set of 3, so if you want to go to Walmart and get this, it's the best. So stir that up. This is day 1, and then day 2, it'll probably be around 24 hours. You will come to your starter, you're gonna throw away most of the starter, not all of it. You're gonna leave about a tablespoon left. Some people will tell you to throw away half of it, which is good too. Just throw away some of it to where there's just a little bit left in the jar or the container. And then you're going to feed it, again, half a cup of flour and half a cup of water. Stir it up, let it sit for another 24 hours. And then the next day, you're just gonna repeat that same step, discarding, feeding for you're gonna do those steps for 5 days. And then on days 5, 6, and 7, you're going to do the same thing, discarding and feeding, but you're going to do it every 12 hours instead of every 24. And the reason for this is it's just kind of gives your starter a boost. It's starting to form those yeast colonies. So the more feedings you give it, the happier it's going to be, and the better it's going to rise, bubble up, and give you those good yeast colonies that you want to rise your bread. So by day 7, you should have a starter that is bubbly throughout and will double in size. And you can measure that it's doubling in size by putting a rubber band around the jar and like seeing that way. Some people also do like a marker on the side of the container, but if it's doubling in size, has bubbles throughout, smells good, you probably have a nice active starter at this point. And you can most likely start baking with it. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, my starter, when I first started, it was doing all those things. It was doubling in size, it had bubbles throughout, and it smelled nice, it looked good. It had like those like the webbing, whenever you like pulled it away from the sides, it looked really good. But my bread wasn't rising, and I couldn't figure out why. And I just kept baking with it, I kept trying, my bread was not rising. So I did recipes that didn't really involve rising of bread. Like I would make pancakes, crepes, I would use other discard recipes like sourdough brownies, coffee cake, just cookies, some other desserts and stuff that didn't really require any rising of the bread. So I did that for a while, and then I was researching, looking some things up, seeing why it wasn't rising bread still. And then I fed it with rye flour. And after I fed it one time with rye flour, it popped off. It overflowed the jar that it was in, and it looked amazing. So immediately I was so excited. I baked bread like an artisan loaf, and it rose and it baked so well, and I was so happy that I finally had an active starter. And then after I fed it with the rye flour, I went back to feeding it with a regular all-purpose flour, and it still did awesome. And from then on, I had a really nice mature starter. This is the rye flour that I use that turned my starter into an amazing starter. So there's a little troubleshooting for you. You might not have to do this. You might have an amazing starter without having to do this, but this is the magic trick for me. Let's talk about maintaining your starter once you have started it. I think this video is going to be a little bit longer than I thought, but that's okay. So maintaining your starter is so easy. Once you get into the flow of baking it, baking with it, feeding it, throwing it into the fridge, taking it out, you will not have to discard any. And this is good because less food waste, less money you're kind of wasting because you are just throwing it away into the trash. So that is good. You don't have to throw any away. The only time you'd have to throw any away is if, like, there's been a time where I've thought I was going to bake something and it was out on the counter, but I didn't end up baking something. The starter fell, and after it falls, you don't want to bake with it because it's not like super active at the moment. So there's been times where I've like let it fall and I just like threw a little bit away so I could feed it more. And I could have just not thrown any away and fed it more, but my container wouldn't have been big enough for that. And you can't feed it less than what is already in the container. So say you have a half a cup of starter, you can't feed it a fourth of a cup of flour and a fourth cup of water, because that wouldn't be enough food to sustain the yeast colonies that are in there. It would start to smell pungent, get black stuff in it, and it just would be super unhappy. So you have to feed it at least what is already in the container, like a minimum or more, so to keep the yeast colonies happy. You can go read about this on my blog. I have a whole section on there about troubleshooting, maintaining the starter, rules that you have to follow. I will leave that linked in the description, but I'm still gonna talk about a few more rules before I end this video. So if your starter is sitting out on the counter, you want to keep either a tea towel or a loose lid on top. If my starter is sitting out on the counter, I put the lid on upside down like this, and I just like leave it gapped. And you want to keep a covering on it because fruit flies, other things, you don't want that to get in there, or just like regular household dust. But when you throw your starter in the fridge, which you can do, you do need to put an airtight lid on the container. But that's only when it's in the fridge. You can keep it in the fridge for as long as you want. Like, I've seen some people keep it in the fridge for like up to 3 months, and they were able to revive it even after not feeding it for that long of time. If you have a nice mature starter, you will be able to do that. I don't recommend doing that at first, definitely not, but it should still be fine. If you're home, you're not going on vacation, you're not leaving or anything, like if it's been in there for 7 days, pull it out and feed it, let it set at room temp for like a few hours and throw it back in there if you're not going to use it. Because if you leave it in there for longer than 7 days, it'll get like a black liquid on top and it'll smell really bad, and it hasn't molded if it has done that. That's just what we call hooch, and you can either stir it in or dump it into the trash and then feed it again, and it should be happy again. Like I said earlier, I have more maintenance things and troubleshooting FAQs over on my blog post. So if you want to learn more about sourdough starter, or if you want to see the recipe, I don't even know if you can call it a recipe, written out, go over to my blog and you can follow it written out that way. But yeah, that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this, learned something from this. Creating a sourdough starter is really easy. It's not that hard, and I hope you guys can create one yourself, because baking with sourdough is literally next level. Like, it does not compare to traditional yeast. So comment below if you created your starter from my blog post or from this video. I would love to see if this worked for you guys. There's no reason it really shouldn't work for you. But yeah, go out there, make your starters, and report back to me, because I would love to hear how your starters are doing. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys in my next one.